Welcome to The Launch, the podcast sponsored by Tandem Launch, Canada's premier incubator. We'll talk about tech, startups, entrepreneurship, fundraising, and everything in between. If you have a research background in tech and always wanted to build your own startup, then check out our website, tandemlaunch.com, to see what we're all about. Now on with the show.
Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of The Launch podcast sponsored by Tandem Launch. I'm your host, Bobby Bedochka, and today joining me is Scott Loong, a partner of Panache Ventures. So thanks for being here, Scott. Hello.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's start off with the normal introduction hoo-ha, but like me, you've kind of had a bit of a windy road, trying to do a few different things to get to where you are today. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I feel like it's a common thing in both VC and startups. You have people with pretty eclectic backgrounds, tried a bunch of stuff, never quite felt fully fulfilled. And then I think the secret sauce for a lot of people in the startup ecosystem is that they acted on it and they decided, okay, let's change it up. Let's either quit something that seems potentially lucrative or really safe and secure, and maybe take a leap. And it happens in a lot of different ways. I mean, for me, my background was I started my career as a corporate lawyer, doing private equity and M&A and general commercial law and that sort of thing. But my sort of first experiences, as an independent person in the workforce was in journalism, actually. So I studied journalism before law school, which I love, and I'm still like a hardcore news junkie, which has its pros and its cons, especially over the last few years. But after I graduated from law school, I did quite a bit of hard work as a lawyer, and never quite felt like it was something that I wanted to do for my whole life. At first, I think a lot of people go into legal careers and a lot of sort of careers that have some level of like traditional prestige to them. And frankly, when I was a student, I didn't really know what it was. I was a competitive person. I did well in school. I wanted to sort of make my parents proud, and all these sort of factors like pushed me towards a career that, in the end, I think I don't regret by any means. But there was definitely diminishing returns for me in my personal growth in terms of working towards where I wanted to be as a person and what kinds of things I wanted to learn. And that happened after about 5 or 6 years. And ultimately, that's what started my transition over to working in venture capital. I spent some time at a really amazing organization called First Capital Partners, which is one of Canada's sort of pioneering early stage fintech specific investors. In that context, I built up a startup called Covera, which is in the insurtech and fintech space. Eventually, I sold that business in 2019, and I was actually looking pretty actively for a new project. I was working with potential technical co-founders when I met the team at Panache, and one thing led to another. And after a pretty long get-to-know-you period, I joined on as a partner in Montreal, leading the investment team in Quebec and Atlantic Canada, and that was pretty much exactly a year ago from now. So it's been a pretty busy 5 years or so, and an especially busy 12 months or so.
Yeah, I mean, getting into venture capital, it's not one of those jobs where you go to university for, I'm going to be a venture capitalist. Like you kind of, you come around through the back door in many ways. But it's fun. It's fun. I really like that you have this. So, just to context, we've chatted before for people, but I like that you have this internal beacon that leads you towards aligning your values with your career. And I don't think that people do that enough. And maybe sometimes you're a bit afraid to switch careers. I've come this far, I went to degree, my parents wanted me to do this or that, but I think it's really important because, down the road, it's kind of what gives you joy each day. And like 70% of people hate their jobs. So talk to us a bit about why you think that's important, and how did you get there? Like, what was the moment when you realized I need to be doing this? Advice to people maybe on how they could do that more.
Yeah, I think of this in terms of not so much having, let's say, a really clearly defined internal sense of purpose or mission, or I mean, I think that if you can have that clarity in your own life, then my hat's off to you. Like I've found that, my priorities and the things that matter to me have like evolved a lot, and are difficult to really sort of put my finger on. But what I do think has been really helpful in my career and in life in general is I like to try and think about why I'm doing things, and it's a coping mechanism that I find is particularly helpful when you're having really tough times. So, whether it's, you're drudging it out, like working like an animal for, weeks on end because you have this big deliverable, or I don't know, maybe things are tough at home, or maybe, you're a startup founder who's decided that you're going to cut your own salary for a long period of time while you fundraise. Like, all of these are pretty testing moments. And I remember when I was younger hearing an athlete who I admire a lot, named Peter Reed, who's a triathlete, and what he was explaining is that before he does his races, which are really long format races, he races Ironman racing, or he's retired now, but those are races that are really sort of a massive physical feat to complete. And he would sort of reflect ahead of time on his purpose. Why does he do this kind of racing? Why does he put himself through the suffering and the training and the grit of actually, winning a race and that sort of thing? And have a clear, it was always important to him to have a really clear answer to the question, why? Because when you're like 35 kilometers into the marathon at the end of an Ironman, like that's the wrong time to start brainstorming your intentions, because you're not going to come up with good answers in that moment. So I always have thought of it as like, okay, if I have this clarity on like sort of why I want to try and do something, then I can rely on it when things are going wrong, and when I'm having bad days or when I'm having bad months. If I'm in that position, I want to be able to rely on something that I've kind of decided internally, a deal I've made with myself, in a prior time. And I think that's helped me a lot over the years.
Yeah, asking someone in their early 20s to know what their values are and try to align that somehow at that age. I mean, you think but you don't know. Like, it took me until I got into my 40s, and I think I figured it out, but maybe when I get into my 60s, like, nah, you didn't have it figured out. I mean, who knows? I think it's really important to understand, like you said, why you're doing it. Because in entrepreneurship, I see a lot of folks trying to start companies because they say things like, I want to be my own boss, and I want to control my schedule, and but really, they're sort of captivated with the fame right now. Like, entrepreneurs are like the new supermodels right now. Like, they're really put on this pedestal, and then I kind of giggle and say, well, there's no schedule to control. It's like a 24/7 kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if that's what you mean by control, and now instead of having one boss, you have a board and investors.
Yeah, and it's a very lonely job. You're having a boss means that you have infinite supply of direction, and you have a an outlet where you get to either consciously or unconsciously deflect accountability away from yourself. And that's a benefit, you know, like that. I mean, you may not like feel that that benefit is sufficient, or, you know, you may not feel that, you know, that ought to be a benefit, but I am sure that it is, you know, because when you don't have that, you notice how lonely it can be, you know, as a
mentally
founder.
taxing. It's like, it's a lot
Yeah.
on the shoulders and on the mind. Yeah. Yeah. So I find that people often kind of have the wrong idea about what it means to be an entrepreneur. So, you know, like you said, please, everybody, take a moment and think about why you're doing it, because I think that really contributes to most of the startup failures, is that people have this idea of what they think it's going to be like, and then they get in there like, this is not as I thought it was.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we see it play out in the market as well. And like, there's this distinction between sort of, you know, even if you're a startup founder who's working 100 hours a week on your startup, like, it doesn't fully define you, right? Like, you have other things in your life, you have family, you have friends, and, you know, you have to, so I do think that there's an important distinction between sort of having this like personal code and also your business, which I think, frankly, businesses that have like a very strong sense of purpose and mission, and that go through that really hard work to articulate those things, end up doing better off, you know. And I think it amplifies a lot of your strengths. I think it helps in making tough decisions. Like, if you have a really clear view on, you know, what your startup's values are, then even like operational decisions can become simpler and clearer, you know. And if there's buy-in throughout the whole organization, then you start to like coalesce around these values, and it becomes a bit of a flywheel. It becomes super helpful, and then all of a sudden it's helping you recruit, and all of a sudden, you know, customers are reflecting those values back onto you, and all of a sudden your marketing copy is basically writing itself. Like, you know, I have to admit that when I first sort of moved from like a legal mindset to a startup mindset, I was very skeptical of like what I would call like the soft side of business. But having sort of lived through it and having seen how difficult it is to properly articulate those values, like, and then ultimately seeing how it helps companies in the market, I'm super sold on it now. And like, since that time, like, I realized how, I guess, maybe snobbish my thinking was, in terms of like having to connect everything to something really like specifically rational, or, you know, very kind of anchored in a stat or in a data or that sort of thing. And I've really kind of come to embrace the sort of emotional importance of all of this stuff, both like in my personal life and also, you know, in business, and now at Panache.
Amazing. So talking about then that soft business, and having been on both sides, so you've been both an entrepreneur, now you're an investor. And if you could speak directly to any of the VCs that are listening, what advice would you give them from the other side, right? So, because a lot of the VCs they come from a political science or economics backgrounds or legal backgrounds or finance backgrounds, and not necessarily having that entrepreneurial side of things. What advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm a person with a year in the craft, right? So there's obviously limits to my wisdom, because I don't have a whole lot of I guess what I'm saying is that there are people in this industry who have much more practical and learned and lived experience as a venture capitalist than I do, right? But to answer your question, I think that you know, I do believe that you could kind of summarize it as founder empathy, right? And empathy is, in my mind, just another way of saying put yourself in people's shoes. And I think, like, I think the best piece of advice from the other side of the table would be like treat founders with respect, and recognize that no matter what you think about their business model, their strategy, their team, their slide deck, their website, whatever, no matter what you think, and no matter how harebrained the idea is, or how disorganized, or how bad, like none of that matters, because at the end of the day, you're talking to somebody who is putting their blood, sweat, and tears into something, and you owe them the respect of showing up on time to your meetings, of providing adequate time for them to tell their stories, doing some legwork ahead of your meetings, so that you at least don't come in completely uninitiated, following up after the meeting, not ghosting founders, going 2 or 3 meetings deep and then never speaking to them again. I mean, I think it's all etiquette, and I think that the career of venture capital is one that, like, from a structural perspective, can lead to a lot of bad behavior. Like, one, you have it's a busy job, like I work a lot, and I think if I compare it to like my life as a lawyer, it's at or more, in terms of like the number of hours like I put in a week. I'm basically always connected, and we do take vacation, and we have like time to unplug, but none of that is really fundamentally comparable to like somebody who, like what we were talking about earlier, has put their blood, sweat, and tears in, and also has really, I suppose, just committed, and to me, I think that's a really important thing. But structurally, because the job is so busy, it does create these kind of like bad behaviors, like slow responsiveness on responding to emails, and not being organized, and not preparing ahead of time, and that sort of thing. So that's like one thing. But I also think like an important thing to remember is, from a structural perspective, there's like a huge power imbalance with founders and VCs, and VCs are I think they often forget that basically they're only really important because they're a gatekeeper to capital that oftentimes isn't their own capital, or at least most of it isn't their own capital, and that like can tend to inflate self-importance, and it can do that consciously and unconsciously, I think. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's not your money, and half of the reason why everyone wants to talk to you and everyone wants you to get to pick your brain and all this kind of stuff is because you control something that's incredibly important for them, and it's important to remember that, I think. And and if we kind of reflect back on like all of the Me Too movement and the stuff that happened in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure it happened pretty much everywhere, when you think about the power dynamics between founders and VCs, and how much, like, traditionally, at least, I do think it's changing a little bit, but how much like recreational drinking is involved and so on, I think it's a recipe for all sorts of bad behaviors, and we have to remember that, and I think remembering that takes work too. You have to remind yourself of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, power corrupts, right? So, I mean, we know that, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's just that's part of being human. So yeah, being conscious of that is really important. So let's shift gears a little bit to Panache. So talk to me about like, what's the process of getting in front of folks at Panache, and what do you like to fund?
Yeah. So Panache is a pre-seed and seed stage venture capital fund, mostly in Canada, with about 20% of the funds getting deployed outside of Canada, mostly in the States in those cases. We actually just raised our second fund, and we'll be writing checks for the next, hopefully for forever, but our next fund is just starting now, and check sizes will be in the range of between $200 50,000 Canadian dollars up to $1 million on first check, and then up to one or more, let's say, on second check. So we are very keen to speak with early stage founders. We are, I would say, more biased towards pre-seed than we are seed, and we are agnostic of sector. So we will look at pretty much everything. The standard sort of VC economics apply, of course. And so we are looking for very ambitious ideas and very ambitious founders that can scale exponentially, because as many of your readers or listeners, I should say, will know, the concept of venture capital is to select companies that will have a disproportionately huge sort of impact on the portfolio construction. And so we are definitely looking for ideas that can be brought outside of a local context and even outside of a national context. And that's a pretty critical part of like the top of funnel filtering that happens at Panache, but also I think at most venture capital funds. In terms of getting in touch with us, we're, I think, very accessible. And this is an interesting thing that I didn't quite understand as well until I became a VC. Usually, like when you think about the fundraising process, it's framed up in the sense of that there's companies looking for funding, right? That's the traditional thing. Okay, I need to go and fund this company. But equally important and equally sort of critical to the success of those organizations, them being venture capitalists, is the ability to find good companies. I did not realize that, before I was sort of, when I was like a lawyer, I didn't really realize that sourcing deals was like as much of a challenge, if not a greater challenge, for venture capital funds than sourcing funding is for startups. And so, if you're a founder listening to this, I would encourage you to just try your best to reach out to pretty much any venture capitalist that you want to speak with, and it doesn't have to be, people have different opinions on this, as in some will say, never cold call a VC, and always use a warm intro. I absolutely think that warm intros are a very effective way of meeting with a venture fund. But I do think that if you are a founder, you need to be good at cold calling, and being good at cold calling is a skill that is applicable in fundraising, in sales, in many other things, in marketing, and many other things, right? So I think getting enough sort of warm intros, will definitely get you in front of Panache. We're a national fund, so we have a partner in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. We're traveling all the time. We're very, very accessible, and I would encourage anyone to either reach out to us directly or to find a way, could be through one of our portfolio companies, which we have many founders, or through people in the ecosystem like yourself, Bobby. It's not hard to get in front of VCs, in my opinion. It just takes a different approach and honestly, it takes a thoughtful approach with respect to who you're. Actually, let's talk about this for a second. So, like, founders will often have this huge list of funds that they want to work through, and like, of course, every single founder in the world wants to go and talk to Andreessen and all the stars of Silicon Valley, and but I sometimes feel like there isn't enough thought applied to making sure that there's good, like, investor company fit before the fundraising process starts.
Yeah.
And there's basics there. Like, the basics is, okay, did they invest in my stage? Do they have a company in their portfolio which is an obvious conflict? There's like some basics that go along with that, and then there's also like substantive and more sort of detail orientated fit criteria, which would be like, okay, this particular person at that particular fund built something cool that I want to like know about or learn about, or this particular fund has a very targeted investment thesis, like that is right in our swim lane. I think there's a lot to be said about prioritizing that list and not necessarily just going for the biggest logos and trying to find that right fit, because you don't want too many investors on your cap table that are just going to bring you only cash and without any sort of non-monetary value creation, like over the course,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes very expensive equity to sell if the only thing you're getting out of it is cash.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I just can't imagine anybody who could fundraise without any cold calling. I mean, at least not at the seed stage. I mean, it's great if you have warm intros, but I mean, that means that you know a lot of people. And generally when you're first starting out, you just don't have that. So yeah, you got to be willing to do cold stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And cold calling is like, there's different kinds, right? Like if somebody cold calls me through a LinkedIn direct message and there's absolutely no context and they know nothing about us, and it's literally just like, hey, here's this investment opportunity. I will probably not really pay that much mind. But all VCs are, human, and therefore they have egos. And, if you really want to be effective at getting in front of somebody, poke around on their social media, poke around on their blog, see what they've written, see what they built, reach out with some sort of context. Hey, I thought it was really cool what you wrote about that. Or, hey, this was an interesting piece that I read that contradicts what you said here. Or, wow, you did something. Like, people love to talk about their own experiences and their own perspectives, and you can use that to your advantage too.
Yeah, you got to make some kind of connection.
When cold calling.
Like, show me why
exactly.
there's something. Yeah, you got to do your homework. You got to do your homework. So the question that I ask all VCs, and if you already covered half of it, that's okay. But we want the inside scoop for entrepreneurs. So what are VCs really looking for, and what gets startups rejected usually? Like, what are they really doing wrong?
Yeah, so some of it we've covered already, but I mean, I think from like a high level perspective, I would say a really sort of compelling solution for a very large problem that can be applied internationally. I would say that it's also very important that you take into consideration not only the problem and the solution, but the rate in which that solution can be deployed, right? So if there's a very important problem in a specific industry that requires a very complicated and highly regulated piece of software to solve, with lots of customization and lots of sort of post implementation maintenance and all that kind of stuff, that is going to grow. That business will grow significantly slower than a business that can be deployed in a much shorter period of time. And sometimes the value of the contracts associated to those kinds of longer term sort of whale hunting expeditions don't match the effort that's put in and the long sell cycles associated to it. So it's like, it's not enough that there's a massive pain point and then that you've come up with an elegant solution to it. There has to be something that enables the technology to grow exponentially and to grow and to follow that curve for years to come. Now, once you have those two components, I think the sort of the last part of the triad is, is this team in front of me a team that I think can execute on this vision, right? And so, are they dealing with a big enough problem? Can the solution scale? And does this team have either the ability or the history or the skills or the network or some sort of secret sauce that will enable them to be the ones who actually execute effectively? I think if you have those three things, particularly when you're talking to a pre-seed and seed stage, investor, you are probably in like the 85th percentile. And I mean, I'd say like the common problems or the common mistakes that are, I mean, there are so many, but I guess the way to answer. Well, look, I mean, I guess the answer is sort of like the opposite of the first part of the question, right? So, not a significant pain point, not an elegant solution, not something that can scale outside of its local habitat. and a team that perhaps isn't best suited to do it, right? And I think that like there's so many permutations of that.
Yeah.
It's hard to narrow it down into a specific thing. But I think all in all, if I were to have to choose one reason why companies are not sort of successful at raising venture capital, I would say that they're not thinking big enough, and that they've allowed sort of their own skepticism limit the ambition that they're applying to the business model, because they are in some way trying to make it more fundable by making it more realistic. And I think that that's something that has happened in Canada a lot, in part because of how risk adverse our venture capital scene is relative to in other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I also believe that in Canada, there's sort of a generalized lack of very early stage funds that are willing to lead deals. There's a lot of funds that are not empowered by their limited partners to take that shot, and that through their own sort of I guess either their own comfort level or through what the deal that they've cut with their investors are only able to sort of follow on. And that's a problem. It's a separate set of questions, but it is something that I think perhaps created behaviors among founders, because as a Canadian, you're going to adapt to the environment, and sometimes that might mean tempering your ambition, so then your story seems less moonshotty. And I think that's really unfortunate, because it's a clear sort of mismatch between the objective of venture capital and of most startup founders in reaction to like sort of what our local scene has become over a long period of time. I do think it's changing, but certainly when I was a founder, I felt that way.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you for that insight. So I got a new question that I'm testing out on people. What is your favorite movie or show, and favorite book, and why?
Oh, I have to answer all of those.
Or it's not, not everybody watches shows or reads books. Answer which one.
I'm gonna sound like I'm just piling on, but I don't know if it's my favorite book, but I loved Dune, the book. I read it a little while ago, and then when the movie was sort of, they were finally making like the sort of authoritative version of the book as a movie. I reread the first book again, and I just love it. Anyone who's a fan of, I'm not a sci-fi fan in general. In fact, I read that book because I was like, I need to read something that's sci-fi, because everyone seems to tell me how amazing it is, and I just wanted to experience it. So I tried a few like Asimov books, which I liked, but I loved Dune. I thought Dune was like so deep and complicated in terms of all the lore and the political aspect of it. It's a lovely book, and I really recommend it to anyone. And I have bought several people copies of that book, actually. In terms of TV shows, I'm not a huge TV fan, but I am an absolute fanatic for The Wire, which was cops and robbers, sort of drug dealer, urban sprawl kind of show. I don't know what year it was. It was. I think there's 5 seasons, and I've watched the whole thing multiple times. And I think it's just like an amazing piece of work that really highlights like how one sort of problem can manifest in so many different places. And like, I think if like, I described it as a cops and robbers show, but really it's sort of like about like how people get bogged down by bureaucracy and by red tape in a way. And like, it's true for the cops, it's true for the teachers, it's true for the journalists, it's true for the drug dealers, it's true for everyone in that show. And I thought that was like a really insightful way of looking at a problem and looking at, Western values over a long period of time. Really amazing show that I would recommend to anyone. The Wire.
Movies. I'm building my list.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So if what I usually say to someone is, if you're skeptical about The Wire, I promise I will watch whatever your pick is. So if you have a pick that you think like Scott's gonna love it, or like everyone should love this, I promise I will watch it if you give The Wire a shot. That's like my deal I always make with people, because I really am convinced you'll like it.
Amazing. But then we got to talk about it, right? Because what's the point of doing all that if we cannot commiserate over it? 100%. I'm a huge fan of crime shows, not because I like crime so much, but because I love human behavior, and they really capture like a real gamut of human behaviors in those shows. So,
but it's like what sucks about like these sort of long shows that, well, like if you go through several seasons, like what I've always found breaks my immersion is when you have a character in like season 1 who radically changes like over the course of the series, right? So like a good example would be the show Dexter, which I also kind of liked, but stopped liking after a period of time because of this problem. It's like there are characters in like season 1 who are like sort of like the Office bad guy, and then by like season 3 they're like the hero. And then by season 4, they're sort of not relevant anymore, and you basically never see them. And I find that what really impressed me about The Wire is like the character who you meet in the first scene of season 1, he stays exactly the same for all 5 seasons. You just get to know him better, and you get to understand all the characters. You get to understand them very deeply, but they're exactly who they are, and they don't change, just like in real life. And you don't have these radical swings where someone 1 minute is like a total sociopath, and the next minute they're like the hero of the show. It's like, that's not real life. Like what's real life is that you get to know people over a long period of time, over years, and you understand how they think, and then you pick up on like the nuances of how they talk and how they solve problems. I just really thought that The Wire gave me that perspective into people that I didn't know, and I thought that was really fascinating.
Okay. Authenticity, I guess, throughout is key there. Amazing. Okay, well, that's a little inside the head of Scott, everybody. So that pretty much wraps things up. So thank you so much, Scott, for joining us. And for those who want to get in touch with Scott or Panache, hit up their website, hit him up on LinkedIn. Thank you again, Scott, for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. And, if there's founders out there that want to connect, you can just email me directly at scott@panache.vc. And if you mentioned that you got my email from Bobby's podcast, I promise I'll definitely respond as quickly as I can.
Yay! And then Bobby gets a drink.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our loyal listeners. Your time is always appreciated. If you are watching us on YouTube and you like what you see, there's a lot more where that came from. So hit the subscribe button, like the episode, and share your thoughts in the comments. And you can also follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So ciao for now.
Thank you for listening. We hope you had fun and gained valuable insights. If you like what you see and hear, hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment, share the podcast, and follow us on social media.